very little about them, professionally. There are many reasons for this lack of awareness, foremost of which might be the fact that nurses no longer wear distinctive uniforms, so we don't readily notice or remember them. No more white hats with the red crosses or white nursing Oxfords. Running shoes, clogs, and blue scrubs, sometimes with lab coats, pretty much constitute the wardrobe of all medical personnel in the hospital, nurses included. And the larger the medical center, the more categorized and confined the nurses become. While doctors, administrators, social workers, genetic counselors, and others float through the hospital, nurses remain more or less in their assigned, self-contained units. And because the workload is often overwhelming, they rarely leave the floor, or the operating room. Scrub nurses remain in the OR throughout their entire shifts, wearing masks. At one point in time, hospital cafeterias were maintained to serve the medical staff, but now they mostly serve as the families of patients. Most nurses in medical center settings have little time to sit down and eat meals like normal people. There are also nurses in street clothes, home care nurses mostly, who tend to the chronically ill or the dying. Nurses often specialize these days. There are transport nurses assigned to ambulances or helicopters, for example, and transplant or procurement coordinator nurses, not to mention nurse practitioners, who fulfill roles once played by physicians. In this collection of essays, you will become intimately involved with many different kinds of nurses from diverse walks of life, nurses of various ages and differing attitudes about their profession. Most of these essays were submitted over a period of a few months in response to a call for manuscripts. We received about 200, and most of them were quite excellent. Few nurses receive training in creative writing, and yet the power of the narratives and the clarity of the prose were quite astounding. Perhaps it is because nurses have such compelling stories to tell, and also because the stories they are telling have brewed inside of them for many years, in some cases decades, that the stories burst forth with vividness and passion. But allow me to revisit the idea of and the reasons for nurses' anonymity in some quarters. Nurses tend to keep their experiences to themselves, though they do trust, confide in, and confess to other nurses. I am not saying that there's no friction or animosity among nurses in the workplace. To the contrary, nurses are more critical of one another than are members of any other group in the medical center, including physicians. Nurses have a lot to prove to themselves and others, precisely because their work is often not spotlighted. But as hard as they can be on one another, nurses faithfully and forcefully support each other in times of stress, emotion, and need, most especially the veteran nurses who reach out on a regular basis to those who are just entering the profession. This mentoring aspect fades as the nurses mature and fashion their own distinct ways of dealing with difficulty, but there seems to be an affinity and connection between the veterans and the rookies, the head nurses and the newbies. A head nurse must be the strongest person in the unit, for he or she serves as a role model. At the same time, this person must exhibit tenderness and be attentive to younger nurses, usually recent graduates, especially those who are experiencing a patient's death for the first time. Losing a patient is an initiation, a passage through which all nurses who work in tense and highly demanding environments must travel, a sad and unavoidable voyage that remains forever in the nurse's consciousness. I observed this passage quite vividly once, learning from the points of view of both the veteran and the new nurse at a children's hospital I was writing about. A head nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU, told me this story. A baby died while a brand new nurse, fresh out of school, 21 years old, was caring for him. I went to be with her right away, even before the baby was dead, but when it was clear that death was imminent, the head nurse told me. I knew that the baby was taken care of. We had other nurses covering that baby at that time, and the social worker was with the mom and dad. So I went to be with that young nurse, who probably needed me more than anybody else did. I asked her, "Do you want to continue taking care of this baby, or would you like to change assignments?" And she didn't say anything, and then I said, "I really think it would be better for you if you took care of this baby." She needed to know in the days to come she could go through this whole process. And she did. She was in tears, but she returned to the bedside and picked up the baby.